How do you react when you're in a familiar place and it's suddenly totally dark? What's the first thing you do? Talk about that for just a moment. We begin tonight's session by reading from Genesis 1, very familiar passage. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless, and it was empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. As God began his creation, before there was earth, before there was what we know to be the created, it was just empty. There was nothing. It was darkness. It was void. But it's over this darkness, over this void, over this chaos, if you would, that the Spirit of God begins to move. You see, I really shouldn't be surprised, because as we read through the stories of the Bible, we very often find stories of how God moves over the chaos in people's life, over the darkness in people's lives, over their brokenness, over that which he's created. And we see him bringing order to chaos. We see him bringing order and light into the darkest of the stories. There's sense and there's purpose to darkness. There's sense and purpose to chaos. Order was not the first thing that God created. He brought order to the darkness. He brought order to the disorder that he had created. And since God created the darkness and God created the void over which his Spirit moved in Genesis 1, and working from the correct assumption that everything that God creates has beauty about it, then we're left with the understanding that chaos has its own beauty, that even the darkest of times has its own beauty. And it's from this darkness and chaos that we find in the beginning part of Genesis 1 that God brings order. And from that order comes earth, comes man, and it has its own beauty. My conclusion: chaos is not the enemy of good. Even my darkest times and periods of greatest trial reflected the very nature of God. God brings order from chaos, even in our lives. Does my brokenness reflect God? Yes, it really does. It's from the darkest times that I've learned to see the real face of God. It's from the darkest times in my life that I've learned to experience and see the very presence of God. It's from my darkest times, from the trials of life, that I've really have learned to see his beauty. This is a recurring biblical theme. It's from the slavery and the chaos of Egyptian captivity that God forms Israel. It is Jesus who came to a broken and chaotic and dark world, and he brought redemption. It's actually from the cruelty of the cross that we find the resurrection. It's from my own story. It's a long journey that Beth and I have been taking as primary caregivers, at dealing with our own diseases and dysfunction at times, that God has brought about ministry. And some of the greatest blessings that we've experienced in life have actually come from some of the most chaotic moments of our life. So this is what I've learned. One is finding chaos takes very little effort. Second thing that I've learned that I can do very little, if anything, to bring order to chaos. But the third thing I've learned, and perhaps the most important of these lessons, and it's where the study is rooted, is God delights into coming into the chaotic moments of my life, into the darkness, into those things that seem to be dark and void, and he brings order in his time and in his way. So as a group, we want you to pause for just a moment and discuss a time of real chaos in your life. Choose a time. It may be something that you're presently experiencing, or it may be something that you've experienced in the past. But think of that out of control, chaotic moment of your life. And then I want you to put your God glasses on. And I want you to see how you believe that God is bringing order from the chaos. Where's the face of God in the chaos in your life? Let's pause and talk about that for just a moment. Now, as a group, we want you to read together 1 Peter 5, verse 7. I want you to talk about how this passage can give you a sense of hope. What is the greatest obstacle that you face in casting all of your anxiety on Him? Talk about that. Okay, we'll conclude this session with prayer. We want you to go around the circle, and those that would like to share a way that this group can specifically pray for you over this next week.